So we're here in Telluride, the first day of the INTERSECT conference on science and spirituality has come to a close, and we're up here above Telluride now, looking out at the valley, the mountains in the distance. And so this morning we heard from the environmental philosopher John Hausdorfer, and he spoke to us about Aldo Leopold, who was one of the earliest conservationists and environmentalists in the first half of the 20th century, who developed what he called the land ethic. And he went through quite a transformation. He was managing land and had an experience with a wolf mother and her pups. And it was his job, managing this land, to take out the wolves because they're dangerous to human beings, they're dangerous to sheep and other pasture animals. And so he shot this mother wolf and walked in closer and sat with her as she died and saw in her eyes what he called a green fire, and recognized in that moment that the natural world it's more than just a collection of objects. And here I'm using the great geologian Thomas Berry's words, that the world is more than a collection of objects, it's a communion of subjects. And Leopold had this experience with the wolf that set him on a new path. And John this morning invited us all to experience the land ethic of Aldo Leopold. And Leopold said something about the spiritual danger of not living on a farm, is how he put it, and that there are two prongs to this danger. One is thinking that food comes from the grocery store, and the other is thinking that heat or warmth comes from the furnace. And so Leopold counsels people trying to get back in touch with the land to plant a garden, grow your own food, and to spend an evening with some wood that you've chopped yourself, trying to stay warm by the fire. So you remember that food doesn't come from the grocery store, heat just doesn't come from the furnace, or in our more electrified day and age, from a heater that you could plug in to the wall, but that we're embedded in these ecological relationships. And John used this wonderful phrase that we need to find a way to connect to the consequences of our comforts. And that really hit me deeply. To connect to the consequences of our comforts. That's what an ecological consciousness would demand of us. And human beings, in the modern context with our technological innovations, we've become more and more alienated from this game, this evolutionary game, and we've thought of ourselves as somehow above it, as though flipping on the light switch was some sort of magical event whereby light just appears, not always attending to the fact that that energy is maybe coming from a coal-fired plant 100 miles away, or thinking that when we flush the toilet that this waste just disappears, when in fact it has to be processed in a treatment plant 50 miles away, and then maybe it gets spit out into the ocean. So there is no way, and each of our comforts that we've grown used to in the modern world has an impact on the world around us. And while we may have lost touch with the way that we do have skin in the game, in reality we're undermining the life systems of the planet that support us. And it might take another generation or two, but we're quickly approaching a time when we will recognize the consequences of our comforts. And the sooner we can connect with those in a conscious way, the sooner we can avert catastrophe. So then this afternoon we had the cosmologist Brian Swim beaming into us via video conference from Washington, and he spoke to us about this shift that he sees occurring out of this modern form of consciousness, which is associated with René Descartes, this dualistic view of the human subject as set apart from the natural world, which is just a collection of objects, and that it's only the human being that has consciousness, that has value, that has meaning and purpose, and that we're kind of an anomaly in nature. And for Descartes, why are we conscious and the rest of the world merely mechanical? Well, because God inserted a soul into our pineal gland somehow, giving us this special property of awareness and sentience and knowledge, intellect, rationality, and so forth. And this view, this dualistic view of the human being, has shaped the last several hundred years of European and North American, and then eventually the entire planet's development, economically, technologically, socially, politically. And this dualistic view of the human being and its relationship or lack thereof with the rest of the natural world has been profoundly destructive, because it's misaligned with what is in fact an integral evolutionary cosmos, or cosmogenesis, as Brian likes to say, where the human being is another expression at the fractal edge of a 14 billion year process of unfolding. And that what our consciousness is not this separate substance or this anomalous epiphenomenon, something that just is sort of the whistle on a train, as T.H. Huxley put it, but rather consciousness is the universe's way of becoming aware of itself. The human being is that organism capable of reflecting on the fact that it is an expression of this universe. And Brian tried to give voice to and to begin articulating something that's still in the process of emerging, but he referred to it as a form of cosmological imagination, or again as a form of cosmogenetic consciousness, where we're placing ourselves, we're resituating ourselves in the context of a process that's ancient, and allowing ourselves to recognize that rather than consciousness being something that happens inside of our heads and something that is in the business of creating a little internal picture in our heads of virtual reality of what our senses receive from the objective world, instead consciousness becomes more of a field phenomenon. And when we take in a rock or a mountain, what's happening is not my consciousness internally representing that mountain, but that mountain is literally entering into my being, becoming a part of who I am. And what my consciousness is just my surrounding environment being amplified by my human organism, by my nervous system, such that as a communal achievement of all this going around me, this ecological achievement, consciousness arises. It's not a property of just some special property of just my humanness, but it's a communal achievement, an ecological achievement that is raising the entire cosmos, or an internalization of the entire cosmos into the point of view that I have on the world. And this is happening everywhere, in every conscious organism. The universe is coming to attend to itself from numerous, infinitely many perspectives. And so again, like Thomas Berry tells us, the universe is not a collection of objects, it's a communion of subjects. And what reality is made of is this interwoven patterning of points of view. And every organism has a point of view. And the universe is in the game of generating more and more intense perspectives upon itself, more and more beautiful perspectives upon itself. So this is the kind of cosmological consciousness that Brian Swim is trying to invite us into. And it's a view that recognizes the human being, I think, as still a unique organism, but not the master of the universe. We are rather the universe just experiencing itself from another perspective. So Brian showed us an image of the cosmic microwave background radiation, which is an image taken of the light at the beginning of the universe, or close to it, something like 380,000 years after the Big Bang. And we've been able to capture this image using satellites. And what Brian was trying to invite us into is this new mode of perception, this new cosmological consciousness, and recognizing the fact that here we are, conscious beings, observing the beginning of the universe, and we're looking at the physical particles, the energy that composes us. And he led us through this sort of turning inside out of our being by saying that the evolution of the universe is this process whereby the outside gradually folds in upon itself, becoming an inside, an interior, that can then observe the outside. The evolutionary process is this journey from outside, folding in upon itself, gaining an interior perspective such that it can become aware of the outside. It's this fascinating topological fold that leaves you kind of dizzy at first. But once we become oriented in this new consciousness, there's no doubt that it will have profound effects on how we organize our society, our economy, our politics. It will allow the human being to become a cosmic being, to feel at home on this earth as a member of a community far older than our species, and as the recipients of wisdom, if only we would pay attention, that is the wisdom of ages, coming from all the non-human creatures that have, been playing this cosmic game of evolution for billions of years. It's humbling.